Okay, what's good everyone, and welcome back to another reaction video. Today we're reacting to Game Theory, the console war is over. I'm going to be completely honest, I don't know what the console war is. My guess is it's a big argument on which consoles are better, which ones aren't, and so on and so forth. That is what I'm generally getting when I hear this title. It's about different consoles throughout the ages, which ones were better, which ones were okay, which ones had the best line of games, which one revolutionized everything, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I don't know what this is going to lead to, but it seems interesting. So I hope you all enjoyed this reaction video. Like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification button to be notified immediately when the video comes out. The link to this video is going to be down in the description below, so be sure to give Game Theory some love and support for the video that they made. And if there's any videos you'd like to recommend that I should react to, put it down in the comment section below, and I'll react to it as soon as possible. Now, other than that, I really want to figure out what's going on here and the details. So let's get right on into it, shall we?
War finally over. For decades, consoles have been battling it out for market supremacy. We've seen companies join in the war and others fall to the wayside. And now, another newcomer has joined the fray, Valve. Some people think the Steam machine truly marks the end of the console war, finally proving the PC master race was always the top dog. But is that really the case? Is this the end of the console war? Or actually, is this the next phase as these companies find more ways to empty our wallets? Hello Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that's ready to stop seeing Twitter threads about which console is better.
No, seriously, I don't know what Valve is, so this is a new one for me.
Who am I kidding? That's never gonna stop, it's Twitter. But we do seem to be at a major turning point for this so-called console war. The console wars have been going on since home gaming systems were invented, but in August 2025, we saw what appeared to be the beginning of the end, with PlayStation exclusive Helldivers becoming available on Xbox and Xbox exclusive Gears of War coming to PlayStation. This, along with Xbox's move away from consoles and more into Game Pass, allowing people to play Xbox games on PC, and PlayStation also releasing their exclusives on PC with potential plans for same-day cross-platform releases, really made it feel like this was the end. Just look at the amount of videos made on the topic. But the real nail in the coffin was Valve showing up in November to announce their own home console.
Oh, this is the new Steam machine.
That's right, Valve, the owners of digital gaming superstore Steam and developers of the cult classic games like Portal and Half-Life, are finally launching a gaming console of their own. Now, you would be able to play all your PC games as well as all of those console games being ported over to PC from the comfort of your own couch. So, does this mean the console war is truly over? Is the Steam machine the nuke to end this multi-generational conversation? Or is there more to this? Well, theorists, you're watching this channel, so the answer is obviously yes. This end to the console war may not be so cut and dry, but to figure it out, we have to take a look back through history in order to understand what these console wars truly were, how the times affected how they were fought, and what that means for us in the future. In September of 1972, the first ever home gaming console was released, the Magnavox Odyssey.
Magnavox presents Odyssey, the electronic game of the future.
The games you could play on this thing were incredibly basic and required you to put a physical overlay onto your screen to make any sense of it. In fact, some games even came with essentially whole board games to supplement what was happening on the TV. But as the 1970s marched on, slowly but surely, consoles started getting better. Other systems released like the Atari 2600, the Commodore 64, Intellivision, and many more. This not only proved the home console market was viable, but with this being a very new medium, whoever could win the market would essentially be the one to decide what a home console was, what audiences should expect from the experience, what controllers looked like, and how the medium would advance going forward. And thus, the console wars began. Well, sort of. It wasn't exactly a war, more like a spirited debate at a boring dinner party. I mean, just listen to this guy.
Star Strike has moving images to make the game appear three-dimensional. Asteroids doesn't.
This sort of competition is usually great for consumers. It causes different corporations to compete with each other, always striving to make the best product. And it totally worked. The gameplay became more intricate, the controls were more fluid, and the graphics went way up. I mean, just look at the difference in quality between the Odyssey that came out in 1972 and the Intellivision that came out in 1979. That's just a 7-year difference, and they went from just 3 pixels to 15,360, which is an insane leap. Plus, it was literally impossible to program games for more than one system at a time. If you wanted to have a game on multiple consoles, you would have to start the game from scratch each time a new port came out. This was annoying, tedious, and for most game designers, absolutely not worth the effort unless the game was already a big hit like Pac-Man. The war was literally being fought on all fronts, which turned out to be a little overwhelming for consumers. These consoles were also all expensive, but the games were even more expensive. Each of them cost somewhere between $20 to $50, which is about $300 today. So everything from buying the console to picking out games was a huge investment for the consumer.
Okay.
In 1983, the
generation.
video game market completely crashed. It was so bad that in Japan they gave it a special name, the Atari Shock. There was a lot that contributed to this crash. There were too many consoles on the market, third-party developers flooded the market with low-quality games, and on top of that, home computers just started to have video games on them. So people decided to invest in a PC because PCs are able to do other things than just play Dig Dug. It was brutal for the games industry. Atari took a big hit, Magnavox stopped making consoles altogether, and a ton of third-party developers went out of business. Then, a hero rose from the ashes of the gaming world. Nintendo released the Famicom in Japan in 1983, and
Oh,
then
the Famicom. Huh. I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't expecting that. I thought we were gonna get to the Nintendo Entertainment System. Guess I can be wrong.
redesigned it for American markets in 1985, calling it the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Oh.
And I'm not exaggerating when I say that this system literally saved gaming. Instead of trying to get the attention of the world's elite, they focused on appealing to children and families. One of the biggest problems about consoles like the Atari was that the joystick was always getting broken. So, Nintendo invented the rectangular-shaped controller with 2 buttons and a D-pad that we all know and love today. Plus, the system was about $100 cheaper than some of the other systems releasing around the same time. At launch,
Fair.
the system had Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., but in 1985, Nintendo released Super Mario Bros., which quickly became one of the best-selling games in history. This was not only a
True.
huge success for Nintendo, but also for the video game industry as a whole. It showed that
Despite all the certain complaints that people would have with Mario games about this one detail in the Mario game, this other detail in the Mario game, and so on and so forth, it still did amazing things in the end. And even to this day, I don't think anyone is going to dismiss any Mario games because some just have like this really cool thing, especially after Odyssey and Wonder Star, I think that's what it's called.
video games could be hugely successful if they were high quality and affordable. And only a year after the NES was released, another Japanese company launched their own competitor. The Master System made by Sega was only $1 more expensive than the NES, but the kicker was that it had better specs, though people didn't really seem to care. People were more interested in the kinds of games available, and Nintendo had that on lock. They had a bunch of exclusive proprietary accessories and toys that appealed to kids, like light guns and robots, but they also had a special licensing deal with American developers. Basically, if these devs wanted to keep making games for the NES, they couldn't make games for any other consoles. Not exactly an ethical business move, but this is a war, and Nintendo was in it to win. If Sega wanted to even have a fighting chance, they had to overcome Nintendo's market strategy, and the perfect opportunity came up in the form of 16-bit consoles. Sega
Fourth
released the
generation.
Genesis in Japan in 1988, and this
The Sega Genesis. Yes, I remember that. It was... Well, I wasn't there when it was launched, but I do know the games that were involved. And I do have family members that were there around the time and actually have played when it came out in launch. Yes. The game console, though, that introduced Sonic the Hedgehog and had various Sonic related games. Let's see, there was Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, and Knuckles.
time they
And I
weren't
think there's a
messing
few
around.
others.
They went in with a two-pronged strategy. They needed recognizable names to sell games, and they needed games to rival that of Nintendo. So they paid celebrities for their name rights to use on games like Michael Jackson's Moonwalker and Arnold Palmer's Golf. They also decided to launch essentially a smear campaign against Nintendo.
You can't do this on Nintendo Genesis.
It's Nintendo.
And finally, they launched Sonic the Hedgehog in 1991, and it sold over 15 million copies. Sonic received incredible reviews and is generally considered one of the best games of the era. And Sonic himself quickly became synonymous with the Sega name. That, along with Sega's unique blast processing, meant that Mario and Nintendo finally got themselves a real rival in the gaming industry. This was the official launch of the console wars as we know them today. Finally, Sega was successful. They had a console that sold over 30 million units and a beloved blue blurry mascot to boot. But Nintendo wasn't going to let them get away with that. Nintendo punched back with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. As the 90s went on, both of these brands fell into more robust brand identities. Nintendo was for families. They had beloved titles like Mario, Donkey Kong, and The Legend of Zelda, while Sega was a little edgier, using popular sports stars and celebrities to sell their games, and they weren't afraid to lean into some violence here and there. Mortal Kombat got popular in arcades, and the home consoles wanted to do a port, but they were a bit too violent to be normally released on a Nintendo system. But Nintendo also didn't want the sales to be going exclusively to Sega, so they both released the game with Nintendo basically removing all of the blood and guts. Sega, on the other hand, kept its violence intact. This is actually what led to the ESRB rating system being formed. The more you know. But apparently that edgy persona and blast processing didn't really matter, because the SNES outsold the Genesis by almost 20 million units. Despite having all the cool tech and even being the first to the 16-bit market, Nintendo's family brand identity was stronger. The safer, less violent games were generally more accepted, and their exclusives like Super Mario Kart, A Link to the Past, and Donkey Kong Country helped carry them through. There were other consoles during this generation like the TurboGrafx 16, but everyone knew Nintendo and Sega were the only real competitors in the console war. But in 1994, a new competitor burst onto the scene.
Sony's
1994.
PlayStation.
The PlayStation. Again, wasn't there for the release, wasn't exactly born yet. But in all honesty, if I have to say anything about that, it's honestly more of a station that I find myself going back to or to more times than not.
3D graphics and a whole new reality.
Sony released the PlayStation 1, kicking off the war between gaming's past and gaming's future. This was the first console to use a CD-ROM instead of a cartridge system. These CDs opened Sony up to a world of opportunity as far as game development went. They could contain way more data. They were much cheaper. Plus, their relationship with devs was also much friendlier. So developers were able to make games bigger and better for a smaller price. The PlayStation could also perfectly port arcade games, and its original games took advantage of 3D polygon graphics, leading to the PlayStation's library of games booming. For the first time ever, gaming felt real, and with kids who started gaming in the 80s now reaching young adulthood, Sony leaned even more into Sega's strategy of making risque games. Don't get me wrong though, they still had to have their silly little mascot like the others, Crash Bandicoot. He was just a little weirder than the other two guys. I mean, Mario seemed like an upstanding citizen, and Sonic was too cool for school, but Crash was a little bit more
Chaotic.
unhinged.
Fear not, Plumber Boy, the Bandicoot will come. I'm coming to get you, pal.
Quite frankly, neither Nintendo nor Sega were prepared to go up against this behemoth of a console. Sega released the Saturn the same year, and, well, it failed for so many reasons. Nintendo followed up with the N64, which was technically a more powerful piece of hardware, sporting 64-bit graphics rather than just 32. They also introduced joysticks back into the market, and they worked! And they had massive exclusives that are still favorites today, like Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. However, like we saw with the Sega
Pokemon came
Genesis
around that
last
time, too.
generation, that tech and a few hit games didn't win them any prizes. The PlayStation was a massive success and sold over a whopping 100 million units.
I mean, I don't blame them. I mean, look at the controller. 2 small analog sticks. Buttons that you don't really have to mash too hard. A more cleaner way of how to play format games. Different controls. A wider variety of stuff. I mean,
leaving both Nintendo
course,
and
it's
Sega
evolving.
in the dust. Sony
So
was
that
now
would
the
lead
big name on
Sega and
campus.
Nintendo
Although,
to evolve
if
too.
you've been paying attention, you'll notice all the big names have been from Japan. But a Western competitor was about to emerge to try and disrupt the market. In 2001, Microsoft showed up and released the original Xbox, and unlike Nintendo, who was still planning on cornering the younger market, the Xbox also wanted to tune into older gamers just like the PS2. On launch, one of the games released with the Xbox was none other than Halo Combat Evolved. This game was absolutely revolutionary. It completely changed the FPS genre forever. The missions were long and detailed, the maps were huge and beautifully designed, and the game was fully voice acted. While all of this might be the standard now in 2026, Halo was the one that pioneered it, and it was all made possible thanks to the Xbox's superior hardware. With 64 gigabytes of RAM, an Nvidia GPU, and an Intel processor, it was able to produce games that before that didn't really seem possible. Once again, we were being shown the future of gaming. And even though this won a lot of people over, 24 million units were sold, it wasn't enough to keep up with the juggernaut that PlayStation had become. PlayStation 2 is still the most successful console ever, selling an insane 160 million units. Even though on paper it's actually the weakest of the bunch, it was also harder to develop for, and yet it had the biggest library of games by a long way. To be fair, like with most new consoles, Xbox didn't need to win this round. It just needed to establish itself as one of the big boys. And Nintendo, well, they released some of their most beloved games on the GameCube, but it was struggling to shake its for kids image in a market that was growing up. That, with its mini disc tech that just wasn't as good, and its commercial flop was all but inevitable. And then the Dreamcast, well, it was Sega's last console, so you can imagine how that went. From here, the console wars
fair.
remained pretty stagnant. It was the same three players for over a decade: Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. Microsoft and Sony carried on with their usual tactics, upping the hardware and the games with it. 2005 saw the Xbox 360, and in 2006 came the PS3, which both won the war in different ways. Xbox 360 had great online play, while the PS3 focused on power, and they both sold pretty evenly, 84 million and 87 million respectively.
True. True. While the Xbox 360 didn't have enough power, and also there was the fact that there were times you could get the red ring of death, something that I think I can say for everyone is something everyone wants to avoid. It was still a good system with a good chunk of games that you could play. While for the PlayStation 3, it was a very more powerful system and came to internet stuff more towards its later life. And the other one, but the 360 had more of internet related stuff, meaning you could play online and all that other stuff. So, honestly, it's pretty much a tie if we're talking about when they were first selling.
But then there's Nintendo, who had clocked something that you may also have noticed. The war Xbox and PlayStation were focused on was tech, but that wasn't the winning factor. The key to success was accessibility and exclusive titles. So they released one of their most famous consoles to date, the Wii. A console that wasn't just controlled by buttons, but also motion controls. It essentially turned your whole body into the controller. It kind of created a league of its own. They didn't need to compete, they just needed to make a successful console. Mix in all their classic titles that people were nostalgic for, along with these new wacky controls, and you had a recipe for success, selling over 101 million units. That's not to say Xbox and PlayStation didn't have good exclusives either. PlayStation still had things like Crash Bandicoot, but now it also had things like Little Big Planet, Uncharted, Infamous, God of War, and The Last of Us. Xbox had
It was a good lineup, in all honesty. Especially God of War and Infamous for me. I just really like the God of War stuff. But Xbox has some good ones
Gears
too.
of War, Fable, and loads more. But it's hard to compete with a console that could even convince my grandma to play Mario. And that pivot from Nintendo, who, as I said, basically stopped actively trying to compete anyway, did cause a shift to focus more on exclusive titles. Well, at least for Sony. The Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 both came out in 2013, and games just got better and better. Graphics saw massive improvements. The stories were longer, but in the end, PlayStation pulled ahead thanks to being focused purely on games and exclusive titles. God of War, The Last of Us Part 2, Bloodborne, Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man. Xbox, on the other hand, seemed to take the wrong message from the Wii's success. They wanted to shift to being more accessible, focusing on becoming a multimedia item rather than just a games console. This included bundling the Kinect in with the console to try and appeal to the Wii's market. But alongside this, they also began putting a number of their exclusives on PC, which meant they did sell more copies, but people didn't see the point in buying a console if you could just get it on PC, meaning it sold only 58 million to PlayStation's 117 million. Nintendo was also still doing its own thing. The Wii U was a bit of a misstep, but then they hit a second console this generation, the Switch, which is still their most successful console ever. Incredibly innovative, merging the home console with their other successful ventures in the handheld console market, and full of incredible exclusive titles like Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, and Animal Crossing New Horizons. Again, they weren't actively trying to compete in the same league, they were focused on their exclusives and finding ways to innovate gaming, rather than keep up with the hardware. But I wanted to mention them so you didn't think I was just forgetting them. When Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 were released in 2020, it seemed like the console war was hotter than ever. Microsoft acquired some of the biggest game devs in the business like Bethesda and Blizzard. It seemed like the plan was to make those guys make only Xbox exclusives, meaning that massive franchises like Fallout or Call of Duty would only be playable on Xbox. This would cause Sony to take a massive hit to the pocketbook, and they could not let that happen. So they got the FTC involved. A lot of weird legal stuff happened that I'm not going to go into, but essentially the outcome was that in order to get the merger between Microsoft and Activision Blizzard approved, Microsoft had to agree they wouldn't make any of their newly acquired games be console exclusive. Since then, the mindsets around exclusives seems to have changed entirely. Microsoft started to release ports of their previously exclusive games to PS5, like Gears of War, Forza, and even their darling Halo. And PlayStation is beginning to follow suit, releasing their games on Steam after a couple of years, although rumors suggest that wait may be shorter in the future, and they're even porting exclusive games like Helldivers to Xbox. So, now that everyone is sharing all their toys with everyone, does that mean the console war is over? If so, who won? And what does that mean for the future? Well, it's complicated. One thing that is clear is that regardless of the generation, the biggest driving force isn't hardware or power or
Hardware, power, flexibility? No, not really. If I have to come up with a reason on why it was successful, it was mainly the for one thing, it was the controls. That was a thing for the time. Other than that, it was the games. Like the quality of the games, the features of the games, how good the games were, how long the games were, did the stuff make sense? Did they not make sense? Yeah. I feel like it was that. That's my guess on the matter at the moment. So let's see if I'm right.
Flexibility, it's exclusive games. If you got the games, you are the most successful. So you could argue that the winner would actually be the sly dog that is Nintendo. While everyone else was trying to one-up each other, they did their own thing and focused on innovation and exclusives of their most famous IP. And for better or worse, they refuse to give those IPs to anyone. But before you start screaming at me in the comments, crowning a winner would imply the war is over, but I'm not entirely convinced it is. It's just the weapons of war are changing. See, with all these consoles boasting the same library of formerly exclusive games, what is there left to fight over? The answer? Nostalgia. Xbox may have basically given up on the hardware side of things, but that's because their major push has been for Game Pass, their subscription service that allows access to their back catalogue of content, which you can also just buy if you want. PlayStation has a similar thing with PlayStation Plus, another subscription service that lets you play all of the old classic games from PlayStation's past. Even Nintendo is doing this with their Nintendo Online subscription, slowly releasing their Nintendo classics to anyone with a subscription. Now, Valve is slightly different. Steam isn't a subscription service, and while most of their games aren't first party, Steam does have the largest catalogue of games ever, and it's filled with classics that are now easily available to you. But the thing is, for the most part, these subscription services are only available on their proprietary console. So, if you want to boot up Jak and Daxter, you'll need to have a PlayStation. If you want to play classic Zelda, you'll need a Switch. The console war is no longer going to be about fighting over new exclusives. It's ironically fighting over the same exclusives that helped them compete in the console war to begin with. Obviously, yes, you can emulate a lot of these old games, so I'm sure there are many of you that think this kind of distinction is pointless. But you have to remember, we are theorists and people of the internet. We are super passionate and willing to go to all the effort to emulate and mod games to play them how we want. But statistically, most console owners aren't that. They're just normal people who want convenience above all else. They don't want to sit down and figure out how to emulate a game or how to get all the mods working. They just want to press a button and play whatever game from their childhood that helps them forget the stresses of today. That is who these companies are targeting with this new phase of the console war. Although, it's basically going to become a war of attrition. With very few new games outside of Nintendo being added to those exclusive lists, it's the old exclusives that will fight that battle, but that catalogue isn't getting any bigger. So where do you go from here? Well, this is where Valve could really make a splash. Yes, they already have the massive back catalogue on Steam. Yes, they're getting new releases. Yes, the Steam machine is on Linux, so it's super customizable and you can make things like Game Pass work through Steam if you want. But Gabe, buddy, if you're watching, if you really want to win one over on old walled garden Nintendo, the way to win is not to just keep up, but to also go back to the old ways and have some exclusives of your own. I mean, the threes are sitting right there. Half-Life 3, Portal 3, Team Fortress 3. I'm just saying, but hey, that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I can understand that. Let's be honest. There are just some days that you just want to relax and all that. And that's all it really is. Hence why there are some people that would just prefer not mods, not anything else, just play the games the old-fashioned way and just go from there. I can admit to being that kind of preferring that kind of style wanting to go back to an old console and just play a game without much issue, without much trouble, and just relax and play. Can't blame them, can't disagree with them, or anything like that. But yeah, there is a. I can see the point. Things are changing, so they had to come up with new ways for everything to work, and so on. While Nintendo has more exclusive titles, and Sony and Microsoft are just like going about things in different ways and fashions. Yeah, I can understand. I have to say though, it is amazing to see how long this kind of thing has been going. I never knew this whole thing. I thought when it came to console wars, it was just more people arguing on the internet, saying which console was better, which one wasn't, which one has like the best games, and so on and so forth. That's what my thought process came to. But it seems like I was wrong on that. So yeah. But with that said, hope you all enjoy. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you think about this theory in the comment section below. And also, now that I bring it up, which console was your favorite? Well, console company was your favorite while growing up? I already said it. I always preferred the PlayStation. Not that I hate Nintendo or the 360. It's just out of three consoles, it's just that the PlayStation is just the one console that I can say that I can comfortably rely on, in all honesty. But yeah, other than that, hope you all enjoy, and I'll be sure to see you all in the next video. Bye!